our community moved back into the sanctuary leading up to Easter in April. And so we have, for the last 2 months, been trying to figure out how to successfully facilitate hybrid worship experience for those online and in person. And I am asked on a weekly basis how it's going, both by people who are sort of watching on the margins and also comparing notes with my peers. And so I can honestly tell you that it's going okay. I would give it a B. Some weeks it's probably a B plus or an A minus, but it has been far more challenging than I anticipated. And so I wanted to just talk about how hybrid church is going and some of the things that we are learning by trying this experiment. So the important thing that you have to understand in our background is that pre-pandemic, we were doing an experiment called Interactive Church or Church 2.0, and it was going really well. Then during the pandemic, we have been online only for about 2 years. I mean, except for some outdoor services and a couple other seasons, but primarily online. And that's been really challenging because it doesn't facilitate, only one person at a time can talk on Zoom, and it doesn't facilitate the kind of interactive experience that we're looking for as a conversational community. It's just not the same. So while it is great actually for what it is, and we're very grateful for it and how it has gotten us through this season, it lacks that certain zest of actual engagement. And so as we have come into this new season of meeting both in the sanctuary and on Zoom, we've had to figure out some tricks, and it has been a learning process. The learning curve has been quite steep, and so I wanted to pass on some of the things that we have been learning. So the first is that if you're going to be interactive, you actually need to think about this in two different layers at the same time. So you want the people who are in the Zoom room to be interacting with each other, right? And you can use breakout rooms for that. And there are some tricks, some behind the scenes stuff that we figured out how to make that work in a way that people feel connected. But the other thing is that, like in our breakout sessions in the sanctuary, usually people gather around our little coffee tables that we have to compare notes, and then they come back and we sort of talk about it as a larger group. So to facilitate that, it has to happen at the same time. And so whether that's during the passing of the peace or whether that's during the sermon feedback time, you have to both have it online, them interacting, and in person, them interacting. So that's like one layer. And that's tricky because that's happening in two places at the same time. Then what we're trying to do, our unique wrinkle, is that we are committed that the online and the in-person gatherings can interact as well. And this has been our biggest challenge, but also for me, the most satisfying element of what we're doing. And as I compare notes with other pastors, both in my denomination and around the country, I actually understand why most people have given up on this. And what they've reverted to is having an in-sanctuary worship experience and just broadcasting it from like one camera, almost like a security camera from the back. And then people can tune in online, like they can watch it, but they're not interacting with each other and they're not interacting with the sanctuary. And so for me, that's just reinforcing the unidirectional, pre-scripted, rehearsed thing that we're trying to move away from Church 1.0 that's not interactive. So that's unsatisfying to me and unacceptable. My ecclesiology, my view of the church is that the people of God, that who's present really matters because they bring their own unique insights and experience and story and perspective and agenda and passion and gifting. And that it's in the engagement, right, that grace and truth are exposed. They happen. They emerge. And so it's just not okay for me to have a stage show that you sort of broadcast like a TV, you know, situation where somebody can watch him, because what you're doing is you're making a spectacle, and then people are spectators. And that's the exact thing I don't want. I have no interest in. Find unacceptable, if you will. It doesn't match my ecclesiology, my interpretation of scripture. It's not what the church is. I know that that's what it's primarily become, but all right. So not wanting to do that, to just broadcast from a camera at the back. And by the way, the churches that are doing it are finding that online participation has plummeted in the last year as people have gotten vaccinated, figured out that they don't need to be there on Sunday morning, have better things to do. They're either in the sanctuary or they're not there at all. And that online watching is, down big time. I mean, it's almost non-existent. Many have questioned whether it's even worth still doing, but obviously we're not done with this COVID pandemic. And as new variants and waves come, we might go back to online church. And so I think we cannot afford at this point to give up on innovation and upgrading our technology. So what that results in is you have to think more like a producer, a TV producer, than a TV preacher. In that whatever you do, you're actually doing in two spaces at the same time, one digital and one analog. And you have to sort of dovetail them or blend them or hybrid them in your own mind and heart so that you have a committed passion to making it happen. Because what you don't want to do is make one of the groups feel like they're second-class citizens and just watching what's happening with the other group. To really engage. So here's a couple little things that we do. After the passing of the peace, we put the Zoom room up on the big screen. And
I always like to check in with the Zoom room. Did you learn anything interesting in your breakout room that would be good for us to know?
It's rain is typical this time of year.
Rain is typical this time of year. Thank you. Yes.
And like where the PowerPoint would normally be, we actually put them up there so you can see the Brady Bunch style collection of faces and boxes. And I say, did you learn anything in your breakout rooms that would be good for the rest of us to know? And they'll tell us what they talked about or what they learned, and we can actually interact with them. It's on the big speaker in the sanctuary so that everybody who's present in the room can hear them. And we have a microphone so that we can talk back to them. And so it is interacting that way. We'll also, during that, in the sermon time, if we have a time of conversation, we also will put the Zoom room up on the screen so that same engagement can happen. The other thing that I'm really committed to is that every week, some element needs to come from the Zoom room. And so that can be the prayers of the people, that can be the call to worship, the liturgist can be online, a musical component. Something needs to come from the online community.
God of peace, in your mercy, hear our prayer.
Into the sanctuary and vice versa. And so your liturgist can either be online or in person. The musician, the same. Prayers of the people from our lay leader. There are so many ways to but if you're committed to it, then you think, well, this has to happen. This is a principle, and we will figure out how to facilitate this. So that is what we are learning, is that you have to think on two levels at the same time. You have to be deeply committed to making this happen and to constantly make it a priority to think about what is happening in both spaces and how they are interacting with each other. And then lastly, to think like a producer, a TV producer, not a TV preacher. And by doing that, it's a pastoral concern to make sure that not only are both groups having a worship experience, a worship engagement, and a worship expression that is totally valid, and that people can be in either place. And we do have people who, like say they're traveling or they're at the cabin or they had a bad week or maybe they're not feeling well, but that they know that the online option is a valid option for engaging in spiritual activity of corporate worship. And so we have people who do both. We have some who are only online or only in person. And by committing to making that work week after week, we are upgrading our technology and we're figuring out the little glitches in order to facilitate that better. So we'll see you soon.